The cool autumn breeze swept through the small town of Millfield as Robert Chen sat alone on his porch, staring at the photograph in his weathered hands. In it, his daughter Lily smiled back at him, her eyes bright with the promise of a future that would never come. The picture had been taken just 3 months ago at her graduation from medical school. Robert ran his thumb over her face, a habit he'd developed in the 6 days since he'd lost her. It still didn't feel real. How could it? Just last week they were planning a small celebration for her new position at Memorial Hospital. Now he was living in a world where his only child was gone. The call had come on a Tuesday morning. Robert was fixing the leaky kitchen sink, a task Lily had reminded him about during their Sunday dinner together. "Dad, you can't keep putting these things off," she'd teased, stealing a dinner roll from his plate. "That sink's been dripping since I was in high school." He promised he'd fix it, and they laughed, neither of them knowing it would be their last meal together. When his phone rang, Robert assumed it was Lily calling to check if he'd finally fixed the sink. Instead, it was a police officer with a voice too gentle for good news. There had been an incident at Lily's apartment. By the time the paramedics arrived, she was already gone. An undiagnosed heart condition, they would later tell him. She had died in her sleep without pain or struggle. The days that followed passed in a blur. Robert moved through them like a sleepwalker, making arrangements, accepting condolences, and trying to comprehend how the universe could allow a 26-year-old with so much life ahead of her to simply stop breathing. Mrs. Patterson from next door brought casseroles. Lily's childhood friends flew in from across the country. Dr. Reynolds, her mentor at medical school, called daily. The community rallied around him, but Robert had never felt more alone. "You need to eat something," said Nancy, his sister who had arrived from Seattle the day after the news. She placed a sandwich beside him on the porch swing, but food had lost all appeal. How could he explain that eating felt like betrayal? That continuing with normal life when Lily couldn't seemed wrong somehow. "The funeral home called," Nancy said gently. "They need to know about the flowers." Robert nodded absently. Flowers. What flowers would Lily want? Sunflowers had been her favorite since she was a little girl. She used to tell him they were the happiest flowers in the world because they always turned their faces to the light. Even in his grief, the memory brought a ghost of a smile to his lips. "Sunflowers," he said, his voice rough from disuse. She would want sunflowers. The funeral home was quiet and dignified with soft lighting and hushed voices. Robert stood beside the closed casket, receiving mourners with a stiff handshake and hollow thanks. Each person who approached shared a memory of Lily, how she had tutored them in biology or brought soup when they were sick or listened when no one else would. With each story, Robert felt both the weight of his loss and the breadth of his daughter's impact grow. Professor Zhang, Lily's biochemistry teacher, clasped Robert's hand in both of his. "Your daughter was extraordinary," he said, his eyes shining, with unshed tears. "She had that rare quality, brilliance without arrogance. She would have been an exceptional doctor. Would have been." The words hit Robert like physical blows. All those future patients who would never know her care. All those medical breakthroughs that might have carried her name. All those family dinners that would never happen. The grandchildren he would never meet. A young man hovered at the edge of the gathering, shifting uncomfortably in a suit that seemed too new. Robert noticed him watching from a distance, never quite approaching the casket or joining the small groups of mourners sharing memories. When their eyes met briefly across the room, the young man quickly looked away. Before Robert could make his way over to him, Nancy appeared at his elbow with another relative to introduce, and when he looked back, the young man was gone. Burial was held the next morning under a cloudless sky that seemed offensive in its perfection. How dare the world look so beautiful on such a terrible day? The minister spoke of hope and resurrection, but Robert barely heard the words. Instead, he watched a sparrow building a nest in a nearby tree, thinking how unfair it was that life continued so stubbornly when his daughters had ended. As they lowered the casket into the ground, Robert felt his knees buckle. His brother-in-law caught him by the elbow, steadying him without a word. The first handful of dirt hit the casket with a sound that would haunt Robert's dreams for years to come. Back at the house after the service, people gathered with plates of food and well-meaning platitudes. "She's in a better place," they said. "Time heals all wounds. At least she didn't suffer." Robert nodded mechanically, wishing they would leave him alone with his grief. In the kitchen, he overheard two of Lily's cousins talking in hushed tones. "Did you see that guy who kept standing by himself?" one asked. "Never seen him before." "I think he was from the hospital," the other replied. "I heard he worked with Lily on that research project." Robert thought again of the young man in the new suit, wondering what connection he might have had to his daughter. Had they been friends? Colleagues? Something more? Lily had always been private about her personal life, focused so intently on her studies and career that dating seemed to take a back seat. Or perhaps she simply hadn't shared that part of her life with him. As the last of the mourners departed, Robert found himself alone in Lily's childhood bedroom. Nancy had offered to stay the night, but he needed solitude. He sat on the edge of the bed, surrounded by the remnants of her youth, swimming trophies, science fair ribbons, and dog-eared medical textbooks she hadn't taken to her apartment. Her desk sat the microscope he'd given her for her 12th birthday, the first real one after years of toy versions. She'd been ecstatic, spending hours examining leaf cells and water droplets, calling him in to see each new discovery. "Dad, come quick. You won't believe what pond water looks like up close." That night, Robert slept in Lily's bed, surrounded by her things, clutching the stuffed tiger she'd slept with until she was 14. He dreamed of her as a small child, running through a field of sunflowers, always just out of reach. The days after the funeral passed in slow motion. Friends stopped calling as often, assuming he needed space. The casseroles in the refrigerator went uneaten. The sympathy cards piled up unopened on the coffee table. Nancy called from Seattle. "You should think about seeing someone," she suggested carefully. "A grief counselor, maybe." "I'm fine," Robert lied, staring at the pile of Lily's medical journals. He couldn't bring himself to move from the kitchen counter. "Her apartment," Nancy reminded him gently. "The landlord called again. You need to clear it out by the end of the month." The thought of packing up Lily's life into cardboard boxes made Robert physically ill, but he knew it couldn't be postponed. Forever. 6 days after the funeral, he drove the 30 minutes to her small apartment near the hospital, each mile feeling like 100. The apartment building was modern and impersonal, all glass and steel. Lily had moved in just 4 months ago, excited to be closer to the hospital where she would begin her residency. The key stuck in the lock, and for a wild moment, Robert imagined Lily opening the door from inside, laughing at his worry, explaining there had been some terrible mistake. But when the door swung open, the apartment was silent and still. Everything was exactly as she had left it. Coffee mug in the sink, medical textbook open on the table, running shoes by the door, a half-written shopping list on the refrigerator, a load of laundry, now permanently wrinkled in the dryer. Robert moved through the rooms, slowly, touching her things, trying to feel some connection to his daughter. In her bedroom, the bed was unmade, a novel splayed open on the nightstand. He sat on the edge of the mattress, overwhelmed by the scent of her, shampoo on the pillow. The sound of his phone ringing startled him. He answered without checking the caller ID, expecting Nancy with another gentle reminder about the grief counselor. Instead, a woman's voice he didn't recognize asked, "Is this Mr. Chen? Lily Chen's father?" "Yes," Robert replied, his voice catching on the word. "This is Dr. Patel from Memorial Hospital. I was the physician who—" She paused. "Who examined your daughter. I need to speak with you about something important. Could you come to my office tomorrow morning?" Robert's hand tightened around the phone. "Is something wrong? Did you find something else?" There was a brief silence before Dr. Patel replied, "I'd prefer to discuss this in person, Mr. Chen. Tomorrow at 10. It's rather urgent." As Robert hung up, a cold feeling settled in his stomach. What could be so urgent about a woman who was already buried? What could possibly matter now? He continued moving through the apartment, opening drawers and closets, trying to focus on the task at hand rather than tomorrow's mysterious meeting. In her desk, he found a stack of birthday cards he'd sent over the years, each one saved. In her closet, the dress she'd worn to her medical school graduation, still in its dry cleaning plastic. On her bedside table, a small notebook caught his eye. He opened it, recognizing Lily's neat handwriting. The most recent entry was dated just 2 days before she died. Called Dad about Sunday dinner. Still haven't told him. After boards, when things settle down. Robert stared at the words, turning them over in his mind. What hadn't she told him? What had she been waiting for? The mystery of those simple sentences followed him as he locked up the apartment and drove home through the gathering darkness, unaware that tomorrow's meeting would answer these questions in a way he could never have imagined. Robert couldn't sleep that night. He tossed and turned, his mind racing with possibilities about Dr. Patel's call. Had they made a mistake about Lily's cause of death? Was there something he should have known, something that could have saved her? The questions chased each other through his mind until the first light of dawn filtered through his bedroom curtains. He showered and dressed carefully, as if preparing for a job interview rather than a meeting about his deceased daughter. The suit he chose was the same one he'd worn to her funeral, the only formal outfit he owned that wasn't decades old. As he knotted his tie with trembling fingers, Robert caught his reflection in the mirror, the dark circles under his eyes, the new lines etched around his mouth, the gray that seemed to have multiplied overnight in his hair. Memorial Hospital loomed large against the morning sky, a sprawling complex of glass and concrete, where Lily had spent so many hours of her short life. This was where she had completed her clinical rotations, where she had been set to begin her residency in pediatrics. Now, instead of visiting her at work, Robert was here to discuss her death. The hospital corridors were a maze of identical hallways, bustling with activity. Nurses hurried past with clipboards, doctors huddled in quiet conversation, family members waited anxiously outside patient rooms. Life and death hung in perfect balance here, and Robert felt like an intruder in this world where his daughter had belonged. Dr. Patel's office was tucked away in a quiet corner of the pathology department. Her name was printed in simple black letters on the door, alongside her credentials. Robert hesitated before knocking, suddenly afraid of what waited for him on the other side. The woman who opened the door was younger than Robert had expected, perhaps in her early 40s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mr. Chen," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming. Please sit down." The office was small but tidy, with medical textbooks lining the shelves and framed diplomas on the walls. Dr. Patel sat behind her desk, folding her hands in front of her. The careful way she arranged her expression told Robert that whatever news she had wasn't going to be easy to hear. "Mr. Chen," she began, "I want to first express my deepest condolences for your loss. Lily was well respected here at Memorial. Many of our staff worked with her during her rotations and spoke very highly of her skills and compassion." Robert nodded mechanically. He'd heard similar sentiments dozens of times in the past week, well-meaning but ultimately hollow in the face of his grief. "I asked you here today because something came up in the standard post-mortem examination that I believe you should know about." Dr. Patel paused, seeming to choose her next words carefully. "Mr. Chen, your daughter was approximately 8 weeks pregnant at the time of her death." The words hung in the air between them, incomprehensible at first, like a sentence in a foreign language. Robert stared at Dr. Patel, waiting for the real reason she had called him in. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "Could you repeat that?" "Lily was pregnant," Dr. Patel said gently. "About 8 weeks along. It would have been too early for her to show any visible signs, but the blood work and examination confirmed it." Robert felt the room tilt slightly. He gripped the arms of his chair, trying to steady himself. "That's not possible," he said, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. "She would have told me. We were close. She would have said something, Doctor." Patel's expression was sympathetic. "Sometimes people wait to share such news. especially medical students who understand the risks of the first trimester. From what I understand, Lily was preparing for her board exams. Perhaps she was waiting until after that stress had passed. The notebook entry flashed in Robert's mind. Still haven't told him. After boards, when things settle down. The words took on a new devastating meaning. Was it? Robert struggled to form the question. Did the pregnancy have anything to do with her death? No, Dr. Patel assured him quickly. The cardiac anomaly that caused her arrhythmia was congenital. It's a condition that can remain undetected for years, even decades, before causing a sudden event. The pregnancy didn't cause or contribute to her death in any way. Robert nodded, trying to process this information. Not only had he lost his daughter, but he had also lost a grandchild he never knew existed, a future that had been growing inside Lily unknown to him, a piece of her that might have lived on. Do you know? He began, then stopped, unsure how to ask. Who the father was? Dr. Patel finished for him. No, I'm afraid that information wouldn't be part of our examination. That would be something only Lily knew. Robert thought again of the young man at the funeral, standing apart from the others, watching from a distance. Could he have been the father of Lily's child? Is that why he had come, but been unable to approach? Mr. Chen, Dr. Patel said, breaking into his thoughts. I understand this is a shock. Would you like me to arrange for you to speak with someone? We have grief counselors on staff who specialize in complex losses like yours. Robert shook his head. No, thank you. I just need some time to process this. When he left the hospital, the world seemed altered somehow, as if he had stepped into a parallel universe where everything looked the same, but felt fundamentally different. He drove home in a daze, barely aware of the traffic around him, his mind replaying Dr. Patel's words over and over. At home, he sat in his car in the driveway for a long time, unable to summon the energy to go inside. The house that had once been full of Lily's laughter now seemed to echo with all the things she hadn't told him, all the secrets she had kept. Inside, he went straight to the box of Lily's things he had brought from her apartment the day before. He hadn't had the heart to go through it properly yet, but now he dumped its contents onto the living room floor, searching for clues, for anything that might tell him who the father of her child might have been. There wasn't much. A few framed photos, some books, her favorite coffee mug. A small jewelry box contained the pearl earrings he had given her for her college graduation, and a silver bracelet he didn't recognize. Her phone had been returned to him after her death, but it was locked, and he didn't know the passcode. For hours, Robert sifted through Lily's belongings, looking for any hint of a relationship she might have had. There were no love letters, no photographs of her with a boyfriend, no obvious clues. It was as if that part of her life had been deliberately kept separate from everything else. As evening fell, he found himself back in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by memories of a younger Lily, a girl he had understood completely. When had that changed? When had she started keeping parts of herself hidden from him? He picked up a photo album from her bookshelf, flipping through pictures of Lily growing up. Birthday parties, school plays, science fairs. In every photo she was smiling, her eyes bright with possibility. Had he been so focused on her achievements, her academic success, that he had missed seeing her as a complete person, with desires and dreams beyond her career? The thought brought a fresh wave of guilt. Had he somehow made her feel that she couldn't share her whole life with him? Had his pride in her accomplishments somehow made her think he wouldn't support her through an unexpected pregnancy? The ring of the doorbell startled him from these painful thoughts. It was late for visitors, nearly 9 p.m. Robert made his way downstairs, half expecting to find Nancy on his doorstep, somehow sensing his distress from across the country. Instead, he opened the door to find the young man from the funeral standing there, looking even more uncomfortable than he had at the service. He was tall and thin, with dark hair that fell across his forehead, and he clutched a small bouquet of sunflowers in one hand. "Mr. Chen?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My name is David Park. I worked with Lily at the hospital. I was wondering if I could talk to you for a minute." Robert stared at the young man, taking in his nervous posture, the flowers in his hand, the anguish in his eyes that mirrored Robert's own. Could this be him? The father of Lily's unborn child? "Come in," Robert said, stepping back from the door. David entered hesitantly, looking around the house as if searching for traces of Lily. He handed the sunflowers to Robert. "These were her favorite," he said. "She always said they were the happiest flowers." Robert took the bouquet, a strange feeling washing over him. How did this young man know Lily's favorite flower? How well had they known each other? "Let's sit down," Robert said, leading David to the living room, where Lily's belongings were still scattered across the floor. "I think we have a lot to talk about." David's eyes widened at the sight of Lily's things, and he seemed to pale slightly. He perched on the edge of the sofa, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, looking for all the world like a man preparing to face a firing squad. "How did you know my daughter?" Robert asked, the question hanging between them like a challenge. David swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. "We met during her pediatrics rotation last year," he said. "I'm a second-year resident. We worked together on a research project about childhood asthma treatments." Robert nodded, waiting for him to continue to get to the real reason for his visit. "Mr. Chen," David said, his voice breaking slightly, "there's something I need to tell you about Lily. Something important." Outside, a car drove by, its headlights briefly illuminating the room, casting long shadows across the walls. In that moment of stark light and darkness, Robert knew that whatever David was about to say would change everything once again. "Listening," Robert said, bracing himself for the truth. David's hands trembled slightly as he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He placed it on the coffee table between them, the soft black material stark against the polished wood. "I was going to give this to Lily the weekend after her board exams," he said quietly. "We had planned a weekend away at the beach. I was going to ask her to marry me." Robert stared at the ring box, unable to speak. The reality of his daughter's hidden life was materializing before him, taking shape in ways he couldn't have imagined. "We're together for almost a year," David continued, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. "We met during her pediatrics rotation, like I said. It wasn't something either of us planned. We were both so focused on our careers. But sometimes life has other ideas, I guess." Robert looked up from the ring box to study David's face. The young man's eyes were red-rimmed, his features drawn with the same grief that Robert felt consuming him from the inside out. "Why didn't she tell me about you?" Robert asked, the question that had been burning inside him since Dr. Patel's revelation. "Why keep your relationship a secret?" David ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so weary it aged him beyond his years. "It wasn't a secret exactly. Just private at first. We wanted to be sure about us before involving family. Then when we were sure, Lily worried about the timing." "The timing?" Robert echoed. "She knew how proud you were of her accomplishments, how much you had sacrificed for her education. She wanted to tell you about us when she could also tell you she had passed her boards, that everything was still on track professionally." David paused, swallowing hard. "She didn't want you to worry that she was getting distracted or making impulsive decisions." Robert felt a pang of recognition. Hadn't he always emphasized Lily's academic achievements above all else? Hadn't he measured her growth in terms of grades and awards rather than personal happiness? Perhaps he had unintentionally created an environment where Lily felt her value was tied to her professional success. "Did you know?" Robert couldn't finish the sentence, the words sticking in his throat. David nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "About the baby?" "Yes. We found out 3 weeks before she died. It was unexpected, but we were happy about it. Scared, but happy." His voice broke on the last word, and he covered his face with his hands. Robert watched this young man's grief pour out, so raw and unguarded. In that moment, he saw not a stranger who had kept secrets with his daughter, but someone who had loved Lily as deeply as he had, someone who had lost as much as he had. "She was going to tell you everything after her exams," David said, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "She had it all planned out. She was going to invite you to dinner, show you the ring, tell you about the baby. She wanted you to be happy for her, for us. The room fell silent, both men lost in thoughts of what might have been. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the old oak tree in the front yard, the same tree Lily had climbed as a child despite Robert's warnings about falling. Did she pass? Robert asked suddenly. Her board exams? David looked up, surprised by the question. Yes, he said. The results came 2 days after she died. She was in the top percentile. A sad smile crossed Robert's face. Of course, she had excelled. Lily had never done anything halfway in her life. Even now, in death, she was achieving the goals she had set for herself. Mr. Chen, David said, leaning forward. There's something else I need to tell you, something important. Robert braced himself, wondering what other revelations this night might hold. When we found out about the baby, Lily wanted to run some tests. Given her medical knowledge, she was concerned about hereditary conditions. David hesitated as if weighing his next words carefully. Her mother died young too, didn't she? Robert nodded, the memory of his wife's death from the same heart condition that had taken Lily still painful after all these years. She was 32, an undiagnosed heart defect. The doctors called it a congenital arrhythmia. They said it was rare. That's what I thought, David said. Lily was worried about passing it on to our child. She had herself tested and she was planning to meet with a genetic counselor after her boards. Robert felt a chill run through him. Did she know? Did she know she had the same condition? David shook his head. The results weren't back yet, but she wasn't worried about herself. She felt fine. It was the baby she was concerned about. The irony hit Robert like a physical blow. Lily had been worried about her child inheriting a condition she didn't know she had herself. The very condition that would take her life before she could even share the news of her pregnancy. I came here tonight because I thought you should know everything, David said, and because... He trailed off, looking down at his hands. Because what? Robert prompted. Because I didn't want you to be alone with this, David finished. Lily loved you so much, she talked about you all the time. How you raised her by yourself after her mom died. How you worked 2 jobs to put her through college. How you never missed a single school event. She wanted you to be part of our child's life. Our family. Family. The word echoed in Robert's mind. His family had been reduced to just himself. But here was this young man offering a connection to Lily. A shared grief that might somehow be easier to bear together than apart. I have her things from the hospital, David said. Her lab coat, some books, a few personal items from her locker. I could bring them by sometime if you'd like. Robert nodded, unable to speak around the lump in his throat. More pieces of Lily to hold on to help him remember. And there's her phone, David added. I know the passcode if you want to unlock it. There are pictures of us, messages. It might help you to see how happy she was. For the first time since Lily's death, Robert felt a small flicker of something other than grief. Curiosity, perhaps, or the simple human desire to know more about someone loved and lost. He wanted to see his daughter through David's eyes, to understand the parts of her life she had kept private. I'd like that, he said finally. David reached for the ring box, but Robert placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. Leave it, he said. It was meant for her. David looked surprised, then grateful. Are you sure? Yes, Robert said. Tell me about how you were going to propose. What did you have planned? A small, sad smile crossed David's face. We were going to Seacliff Beach. It's where we had our first real date. We went tide pooling. Lily was fascinated by the tiny ecosystems in the rocks. She could name every species we found, down to the scientific classification. His eyes took on a faraway look. I was going to suggest we go back to that same spot at sunset. I had it all planned out. As David spoke, painting a picture of the future he and Lily had imagined together. Robert could almost see it. His daughter on the beach, laughing, her hair blowing in the wind, her hand touching her stomach in that unconscious gesture of new mothers-to-be. For a moment, that vision seemed more real than the crushing reality of her funeral. She would have said yes, Robert said softly. David looked up, his eyes filled with gratitude for this small comfort. You think so? I know so, Robert replied. My daughter never did anything halfway. If she loved you, it would have been with her whole heart. The two men sat in silence for a moment, united in their love for a woman who was gone but somehow still present in the room with them, in the memories they shared. Would you like some coffee? Robert asked finally, the simple offer of hospitality feeling like the first normal thing he had done in days. I think we have a lot to talk about. David nodded. I'd like that very much, Mr. Chen. Robert, he corrected. Call me Robert. In the kitchen, as Robert went through the familiar motions of making coffee, he noticed a small calendar hanging on the wall, one Lily had given him last Christmas. The date of her funeral was circled in black, a day he had marked as the worst of his life. But now, just a week later, here he was, making coffee for the man who would have been his son-in-law, the father of his grandchild. He wondered what date he should circle now. This day of revelations that had somehow brought both fresh pain and unexpected connection. Perhaps no circle was needed. Perhaps the straight line of days stretching forward was enough, each one an opportunity to learn more about the daughter he thought he had known completely, but who had contained depths he was only beginning to discover. When he returned to the living room with 2 steaming mugs, David was looking at a photo of Lily as a teenager, her arms raised in triumph after winning a science competition. She kept that trophy in our apartment, David said it was the first time she realized she could make a difference in the world through medicine. Robert handed David a mug, their fingers briefly touching in the exchange. Tell me more, he said, settling into his chair. Tell me everything about her that I didn't know. As night deepened around the house, the two men began the careful work of piecing together a more complete picture of Lily, not just as a daughter or a partner, but as the complex, brilliant, loving woman she had been, and in sharing these stories they found something neither had expected on this night of grief, the fragile beginnings of healing. The morning after David's visit, Robert woke with a strange sense of purpose. For the first time since Lily's death, he didn't feel the crushing weight of grief the moment consciousness returned. Instead, he felt a restless energy, a need to understand more about his daughter's life, the parts she had kept from him. He showered and dressed quickly, then called the number David had written down for him the night before. The young doctor answered on the second ring, his voice rough with sleep. I want to see her apartment again, Robert said without preamble. Really see it this time. Would you come with me? There was a brief pause before David replied. Of course. When? Today. Now, Robert said, surprising himself with his urgency. I need to know her better. An hour later, they met outside Lily's apartment building. David looked tired, with shadows under his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept much after leaving Robert's house. But there was also relief in his expression, as if he had been waiting for this invitation. I have a key, David said, holding up a small silver key attached to a keychain shaped like a stethoscope. She gave it to me 3 months ago when she moved in. Inside, the apartment felt different to Robert now. What had previously seemed like an impersonal space filled with his daughter's belongings now felt like a place where she had lived, loved, and planned a future. He noticed details he had missed before. A second coffee mug beside the sink, a pair of men's slippers tucked neatly under the coffee table, a framed photo of Lily and David at what appeared to be a hospital fundraiser, both dressed formally, and smiling widely at the camera. She kept us hidden in plain sight, Robert murmured, picking up the photo. David moved to stand beside him. Not hidden, he corrected gently. Just private. Lily was always private about personal things. She said she got that from you. Robert smiled sadly, recognizing the truth in those words. He had always been a private man, especially after his wife died. Perhaps he had taught Lily too well the habit of keeping emotions contained, of presenting only the polished, accomplished parts of herself to the world. Her phone, Robert said, remembering David's offer from the night before. "You said you know the passcode?" David nodded and went to the bedroom, returning moments later with Lily's phone. "It's 0517, he said, handing it to Robert. "Your birthday. She used it for everything important." Robert felt a tightness in his chest as he entered the numbers. The phone unlocked to reveal a photo of Lily and David on a beach, their faces close together, the setting sun casting a golden glow over them. He swiped through to her photo gallery, finding hundreds of pictures. Lily in her white coat at the hospital, Lily and David hiking in the mountains, Lily making funny faces at the camera. And then, with a jolt, he found a folder simply labeled, "Baby." Inside were photos of pregnancy tests showing positive results, a screenshot of a calendar with the estimated due date circled, and a sonogram image so early that the baby was barely more than a small, bean-shaped blur. "She was so excited," David said quietly, watching over Robert's shoulder. Scared, too, about the timing with her career, but mostly excited. She started researching everything right away. Prenatal vitamins, developmental milestones, childcare, options near the hospital. Robert stared at the sonogram, his finger hovering over the tiny image. His grandchild. A life that had barely begun before it ended. A future that would never be realized. He felt the grief rising again. But different. This time, grief not just for what he had lost, but for what might have been. "She made a video," David said suddenly. "The day after we found out. She said she wanted to document everything for the baby to see someday." Robert looked up sharply. "A video?" David reached for the phone, navigating to a video file tucked away. In another folder. "She only made this one. She was planning to make more after her exams were over." With trembling fingers, Robert pressed play. Lily's face filled the screen, her eyes bright with excitement, her smile wider than Robert had seen in years. "Hello, little one," she said, her voice slightly breathless. "This is your mom. You're about the size of a blueberry right now, according to my medical textbooks, which I promise not to quote too much in these videos." She laughed, a sound that made Robert's heart ache with longing. "I just wanted to start documenting this journey, so you'll know someday how much you were wanted, right from the very beginning." She adjusted the camera, revealing that she was sitting in this very apartment, on the couch where Robert and David had just been standing. "Your dad doesn't know I'm making these videos yet," she continued with a conspiratorial smile. "He's at work. He's a doctor too, by the way, a really good one. You hit the genetic jackpot there, little blueberry." She paused, her expression softening. "And your grandfather, my dad, he's going to adore you. He raised me by himself after my mom died, and he's the strongest, kindest person I know. He's going to teach you all sorts of things. How to fix engines, how to grow tomatoes, how to be brave when things are hard." Robert couldn't hold back a sob at these words. David placed a steadying hand on his shoulder but remained silent. As the video continued, "I'm planning to tell them both after my board exams next month," Lily went on. "Your dad already knows about you, of course, but we're keeping our little secret from everyone else until then." She touched her stomach gently. "I want to be able to tell my dad that everything is still on track with my career when I also tell him about you. He sacrificed so much for my education. I want him to know it wasn't wasted, that I can be both, a doctor and a mom." The video ended shortly after, with Lily promising to make another update soon. Robert stared at the frozen final frame of his daughter's smiling face, feeling as if he'd been given a precious gift and had it taken away in the same moment. "She made it sound like I would have been disappointed," he said, his voice hoarse, "like I would have valued her career over her happiness." David shook his head. "That's not how she meant it. She just wanted everything to be perfect when she told you, her career secure, our future planned out. She wanted you to see that she had everything under control, that you didn't need to worry about her." "But I would have worried anyway," Robert said with a sad smile. "That's what parents do." They spent the next few hours going through Lily's apartment thoroughly, with David explaining the significance of items Robert might have overlooked. Medical journals with Lily's notes in the margins, a half-finished research paper on her laptop, a drawer full of small gifts she had been collecting for David's upcoming birthday. In her desk, they found a letter addressed to Robert sealed but never sent. With shaking hands, he opened it, recognizing Lily's handwriting immediately. "Dad," it began. "By the time you read this, you'll already know about David and the baby. I hope you're not upset that I kept them from you for a while. I wanted to tell you in person, to see your face when you found out you're going to be a grandfather." The letter continued, explaining her hopes and fears, her plans for balancing motherhood and medicine, her excitement about bringing together the two men she loved most in the world. The final paragraph brought fresh tears to Robert's eyes. "I know Mom would have been so happy about this," Lily had written. "Sometimes I try to imagine what advice she would give me, what kind of grandmother she would have been. I hope our baby has her laugh and your steadiness. I hope I can be half the parent you have been to me. Love always, your Lily." Robert carefully folded the letter and placed it in his pocket, close to his heart. "She would have been an amazing mother," he said. David nodded, wiping away his own tears. "The best." As afternoon turned to evening, they ordered takeout from Lily's favorite Thai restaurant and sat at her small kitchen table, sharing more stories and memories. David talked about his first impressions of Lily during a difficult case at the hospital, how her confidence and compassion had impressed him long before they ever dated. Robert shared stories of Lily's childhood, her determination to ride a bike without training wheels at age 4, her first science experiment that had turned the kitchen blue, her high school graduation speech that had moved him to tears. "Feel like I'm getting to know a whole new side of her," Robert said as they cleared away the containers. "Like I'm meeting my daughter all over again." "She was different with different people," David observed. "More serious at work, more playful with me, more achievement-oriented with you, but always Lily." As they prepared to leave the apartment, Robert paused at the door, looking back at the space where his daughter had lived her final months. He had come here seeking answers and had found something more valuable, a broader, deeper understanding of the woman his daughter had become. "We should pack up her things soon," he said. "The landlord called again yesterday." David hesitated, then said, "Actually, I was thinking about that. My lease is up next month and—" He stopped, looking uncertain. "You want to keep the apartment?" Robert finished for him. David nodded. "Is that strange? I know she's gone, but I feel closer to her here. To them both." Robert considered this for a moment, then shook his head. "It's not strange at all. I think Lily would like knowing you were here." As they locked up and walked to their cars, Robert felt the weight of the day's discoveries settling around him. Not the crushing weight of grief that had been his constant companion, but something more complex, sadness mixed with gratitude, loss tempered by connection. "Will you come to dinner on Sunday?" he asked suddenly. "It was our tradition. Lily and I always had Sunday dinner together. I think she would want us to continue it." David looked surprised, then deeply moved. "I'd be honored," he said. As they parted ways in the parking lot, Robert thought about the sonogram image now saved. On his phone, the letter in his pocket, the dinner plans for Sunday. His daughter was gone, her unborn child with her. But somehow, against all odds, he had found a new connection, a thread of family he hadn't known existed a week ago. It wasn't the future any of them had planned. But as Robert drove home through the gathering darkness, he felt the first fragile tendrils of a new kind of hope taking root in his heart. 6 months had passed since Robert buried his daughter. 6 months since he discovered she had been pregnant. 6 months of Sunday dinners with David, of shared memories and quiet grief, of learning to navigate a world that no longer included Lily. The seasons had changed, summer giving way to fall, fall to winter, and now the first tentative signs of spring were appearing in Robert's garden. He knelt in the soft earth, carefully planting sunflower seeds along the fence line. Lily's favorites. They would bloom in late summer, tall and bright, faces turned toward the sun. "Need any help?" David asked, coming around the side of the house, with 2 mugs of coffee. Robert sat back on his heels, accepting the offered mug gratefully. "Just finished, actually. Thanks." In the months since Lily's death, David had become a regular presence in Robert's life. What had begun as Sunday dinners had gradually expanded to include holiday celebrations, weekend projects around the house, and now, garden planning. They had developed a comfortable routine, these two men bound by their love for a woman who was gone, but still so present in their lives. The genetic counselor called, David said, settling onto the wooden bench beneath the old oak tree. The results are back. Robert felt his heart quicken. They had been waiting for these test results for weeks, the genetic screening that would tell them if the heart condition that had taken both Lily and her mother was hereditary, if it could be passed down to future generations. And, Robert asked, joining David on the bench. David took a deep breath. It's not genetic, at least not in the way we thought. The counselor said it was a spontaneous mutation that occurred in your wife, not something present in either of your families. Genetic backgrounds. Robert let this information sink in. So Lily couldn't have passed it to her baby. No, David confirmed. And any future children I might have wouldn't be at risk either. The unspoken question hung in the air between them. Would David move on someday? Find someone else, have the family he and Lily had planned together? It was a possibility neither man had discussed, though Robert knew it was natural, even inevitable. David was young, just 30, with his whole life ahead of him. That's good news, Robert said finally, meaning it despite the complex emotions the topic stirred in him. The idea of David with someone else brought both pain and a strange sense of relief. Pain that Lily could be replaced, relief that David might still find happiness. It is, David agreed, though it doesn't change anything that happened. Robert nodded, understanding completely. Good news after a tragedy was always bittersweet, tainted by the knowledge that it came too late for the ones you'd lost. They sat, in companionable silence for a while, drinking their coffee and watching the clouds drift across the sky. These quiet moments had become precious to Robert, a balm for the ragged edges of his grief. I've been thinking about something, David said eventually. A way to honor Lily and the baby. Robert turned to look at him, curious. What kind of way? A scholarship, David explained, his eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. For medical students interested in maternal health research, we could call it the Lily Chen Memorial Scholarship. The idea resonated with Robert immediately. It was perfect. A way to create something lasting and meaningful from their loss, something that would help others while keeping Lily's memory alive. I think she would have loved that, he said, his voice thick with emotion. She always wanted to make a difference. I thought we could fund it together, David continued. I've been saving what I can from my salary, and if you wanted to contribute, too. Yes, Robert said without hesitation. Absolutely yes. They spent the rest of the morning discussing details. How to establish the scholarship, what the criteria would be, how to announce it to the medical community. For the first time in months, Robert felt a surge of pure enthusiasm untainted by grief. This was something good they could build together, a way to create meaning from the senseless loss they had endured. After lunch, they drove to the cemetery together, a monthly ritual they had established. Robert brought fresh sunflowers, David a small white teddy bear he placed carefully against the headstone. They had chosen to acknowledge the unborn baby on Lily's marker, with a simple addition to the inscription, Beloved daughter doctor, and mother-to-be. I have my board certification exams next month, David said as they stood before the grave. I've been studying like crazy. Lily would be proud, I think. She would, Robert agreed. She always said you were the most dedicated doctor she knew. Did she? David asked, looking surprised and pleased. She never told me that. She told me during one of our Sunday dinners about 2 months before she died, Robert recalled. She mentioned a difficult case you'd handled, a child with a rare condition. She said she'd never seen anyone work harder to find answers. David smiled at this revelation, another small piece of Lily to hold on to. These fragments of memory were precious gifts they continued to exchange, filling in the picture of the woman they had both loved in different ways. As they walked back to the car, Robert noticed a young couple with a newborn, placing flowers on a nearby grave. The sight would have been unbearable in those early days after Lily's death, a sharp reminder of what he had lost. Now it brought a more complex emotion, sadness mixed with a kind of peace. Life continued its cycles of joy and sorrow, beginnings and endings. "I'm thinking of volunteering at the Children's Hospital," Robert said as they drove home. "They have a program where retired folks read to the kids, help out with activities. Seems like something I could do." David glanced over, clearly pleased. "I think that's a great idea. They're always looking for volunteers in the pediatric ward. I've been retired for 6 months now, and the house projects are almost done," Robert continued. "I need something meaningful to do with my time." After Lily's death, Robert had accelerated his retirement plans, unable to focus on his engineering job through his grief. The time off had been necessary for healing, but lately he'd felt the need to reconnect with the world, to be useful again. "You know," David said, "they're also looking for people to help with the hospital's community garden. Given your green thumb, you might enjoy that too." Robert considered this. The idea of helping create a healing space for sick children appealed to him. Maybe I could do both. Back at Robert's house, they found Nancy waiting on the porch. She had been visiting more frequently since Lily's death, her initial week-long stay extending to monthly visits that Robert had come to appreciate. She and David had developed their own friendship, bonding over shared stories of Lily and a mutual concern for Robert's well-being. "I was about to call you too," she said as they approached. "I found something while cleaning out the attic, something I think you should see." Inside, spread across the dining room table, were photo albums and home videos Nancy had discovered in old storage boxes, documenting Lily's childhood years in more detail than Robert had remembered existed. There were videos of Lily's first steps, her kindergarten graduation, family vacations at the lake. "I thought maybe we could digitize these," Nancy suggested. "Create a proper archive of Lily's life." David picked up a photo of Lily at about 10 years old, proudly displaying a science fair ribbon. "That would be amazing. Maybe we could include some of these photos in the scholarship materials with your permission." Robert looked at the collection of memories spread before them, his daughter's life captured in snapshots and video clips from infancy to adulthood. These images, combined with the ones from David's phone and Lily's apartment, told the complete story of who she had been. "Yes," he said. "I'd like that. I'd like people to know who she was." As evening approached, Nancy insisted on cooking dinner for them, the kitchen filled with the smell of Lily's favorite lasagna recipe, another family tradition being kept alive. Robert set the table for 3, placing a small vase of sunflowers in the center. "I spoke with the hospital board today," David said as they ate. "They're enthusiastic about the scholarship idea. They suggested we could announce it at the annual fundraising gala next month." "Will you be comfortable with that?" Nancy asked Robert. It would mean talking about Lily in public. Robert considered this. 6 months ago, he couldn't have imagined standing in front of a crowd speaking about his loss. But now the idea of sharing Lily's story, of celebrating her life rather than just mourning her death, felt right. "I think I would," he said. "I'd like people to know about her work, her passion for medicine, and about the baby too. They were both real. They both mattered. Their lives were brief, but they should be remembered." David reached across the table to squeeze Robert's hand briefly. "We'll write the speech together." After dinner, as Nancy washed dishes and David took a call from the hospital, Robert stepped onto the back porch. The evening was cool but pleasant, the sky clear and filled with stars. He thought about the scholarship, the volunteering, the videos they would preserve, the speech they would write, all the ways they were keeping Lily present in the world. When he had buried his daughter 6 months ago, Robert had believed his life was over in any meaningful sense. The discovery of her pregnancy a week later had only deepened his despair, adding another layer of loss to bear. He could never have imagined then that he would be here now, planning for a future that, while different from anything he had expected, still contained purpose and even moments of joy. David joined him on the porch, leaning against the railing and looking up at the stars. Lily used to say that people we've lost are like stars, he said quietly. We can't touch them anymore, but their light still reaches us. Robert nodded, feeling the truth of those words. The light of his daughter's life continued to guide him, to warm him even in her absence. And somehow, improbably, that light had brought him not just grief but also this unexpected gift, a new kind of family, forged in loss but sustained by love. We're going to be okay, aren't we? David asked, the question holding all the vulnerability of a son seeking reassurance. Robert looked at this young man who had become so important to him, who carried a piece of Lily in his heart, just as Robert did, and felt a sudden surge of protective affection. Yes, he said, placing a hand on David's shoulder. We're going to be okay. We have each other now. Above them, the stars continued their ancient vigil, bearing witness to the resilience of the human heart, its capacity to break completely, and yet somehow, miraculously, find a way to love again.